The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Robert Davis, Ph.D., is a sensory neuroscientist who has brought science to the study of unidentified flying objects, and most recently to the various aspects of life after death, including near-death experience, out-of-body experiences, apparitions, reincarnation, and mediumship. In his new book, Life After Death, An Analysis of the Evidence, Dr. Davis examines the experimental evidence and theories of existence after death. He explores the potential for an afterlife through the analysis of case studies, interviews, and researched findings. In addition, he examines evidence-based scientific theories that include the multiverse, biologic brain activity, and the consciousness-brain connection. Dr. Davis, welcome to NDE Radio.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be on your exceptional show. I'm a big fan, Lee. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for that. We normally, of course, talk mainly about NDEs and the like, but you are also the author of a book, The UFO Phenomenon, Should I Believe? And given the recent article in the New York Times that the Pentagon's admitting to following UFOs, I was wondering if you could tell us about that and what you think is going on there at the Pentagon.
Well, it's a matter of speculation, but it certainly is very good news. The UFO community is ecstatic over this. Millions of people firmly believe that some unknown aerial phenomena has existed in our skies for decades, if not centuries or longer. This is just tends to be a confirmation of what we already know. There is an overarching question, however, which is, of course, if these are indeed intelligently controlled craft of some type from somewhere that somehow interacting with our planet and humans, the obvious question is, what is their objective purpose? And interestingly, I am conducting research with many of the members of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences, and what we are finding is that individuals, thousands in fact, in our study, are interacting with this phenomenon in varying ways, and it is largely a non-physical type of interaction. It is also physical, there's no question about it. Mm-hmm. But these individuals experience out-of-body-like experiences, which incorporate alterations of space and time. They are also transformed behaviorally, generally in a very positive manner, consistent with individuals who also have NDEs, among other types of spiritual, mystical, and extraordinary experiences. But these changes in their personality, philosophical viewpoints are extraordinary. And they do report interacting with non-human intelligent beings of varying types, receiving messages telepathically. But again, they experience profound love. They are transformed in a positive way, showing increase in spirituality, expanded consciousness, concerns about the welfare of our planet. They become more sympathetic, empathetic to the needs of others. There's a full range of physical, psychological, even paranormal-like activities that are associated with this phenomenon. But
right. I was going to say, this seems so much broader a reaction to alien contact than the early writing, for instance, the Betty and Barney Hill type stories always implied a kind of ominous evil intent on the part of the aliens, genetically modifying our bodies or implanting fetuses and the theft of fetuses. And I mean, it was really quite scary, those early stories and you seem to take a much more positive your research is taking a much more positive look at this contact that's going on.
Oh, indeed. We are looking at it objectively. We have a very large population database, and indeed, it's not always a positive experience. Some of the things you mentioned are reported to occur, but it is inconsistent with the traditional held belief that this is largely a very negative experience that involves biologic experimentation, implantation of devices. It's some small percent of our population say that, but the bigger picture, in my mind, is that all of these so-called contact modalities or spiritual, mystical, and extraordinary experiences, of which the unidentified aerial phenomena and interaction with non-human intelligent beings are just a part. The other parts are, in my mind, OBEs and NDEs, as well as shamanic journeys, even DMT, the active ingredient in ayahuasca, mystical meditation, all of these types of spiritual, mystical experiences, whatever you may want to call it, tends to alter the perception of time and space in those who experience it. They tend to gain insight and wisdom, a compelling sense that the experience is realer than real, that profound feeling, sense of love that's overpowering. I recall one quote from a woman who had an NDE. She said the magnitude of the love that she felt during her NDE was like, in her words, something like looking at your newborn baby's eyes for the first time, magnified 10 million times. Now, that's getting at it, but you obviously cannot fully understand the essence of the experience. But this is what so many thousands, if not millions of people worldwide are reporting in varying ways through different types of mystical, shall we say, experiences, which include UFOs and NDEs.
Right. Well, it is an out-of-body experience that we're talking about when we talk about NDEs and out-of-body experiences and the like. Do you think the contacts that are being made with aliens are also involve human out-of-body? I mean, is this taking place on a different dimension than just the physical?
Well, we tend to see that the reports from our population sample of over 3,500 individuals is that this is largely a non-physical phenomena. It is also physical, however. There is a nuts and bolts aspect to it, but it's largely non-physical in the sense that individuals, again, report to have telepathic communication with beings, the vast majority of whom are actually human-looking, in addition to the grays and other types of beings that are typically reported. Even deceased relatives, which is a common characteristic of individuals who have NDEs and OBEs, as well as religious figures, even angels are reported during the NDE, as you and your audience are well aware of. But the aspect of that psycho-spiritual behavioral transformation is something that really grabs my attention tenfold. And that aspect of information and awareness regarding love, which was a major finding in a study by, I believe it was Dr. Long, testimony from individuals who contend that aspect of the NDE, like UFOs, being the sensation of profound love, predominates. And the question obviously is why? Why are they transformed in a similar manner? Why did they experience love? Why did they have similar types of alterations in space and time and no longer fear death? That many studies have clearly illustrated that in individuals who, for instance, 75% of a large study population fear death, but after their NDE, they don't necessarily welcome it, but if they were told they were going to die today, they wouldn't really care very much.
Right. There's very little fear. Well, if aliens are created beings as well as human beings, maybe they have advanced far enough that they understand the light and the nature of the light and the fact that the universe should be love-based, and maybe they're here to help us learn that lesson.
Well, that's a very important point, because getting at the overarching issue is not whether or not that pilot in the F-18, noticed a remarkable physical craft making maneuvers that contradicts the laws of physics. The bigger picture, yes, is why, if they are indeed valid, and I do believe it is, and it is controlled by a form of intelligence. where are they from? And obviously theories exist, which include the extraterrestrial hypothesis and certainly the interdimensional hypothesis. And we have to look at that closely, because the interdimensional hypothesis may very well lie at the heart of all of these types of experiences that we are addressing. That incorporates an out-of-body experience, which is symptomatic of an NDE and even a UFO experience, such that maybe when we are not restrained by our brain's sensory systems, which are limited in nature and only reveal a small spectrum of reality, given the restricted range of our sensory capabilities, once we are removed from that through an out-of-body experience, maybe that is why individuals report seeing reality in a holographic view. In other words, they can see 360 degrees around them. They can visualize their body and other deceased relatives and beings of varying types, and they seem to understand everything. They feel that they have an interconnectedness with the universe. They're one with the God, whatever that means. Again, our words can't capture the essence of the experience by those who have it, other than they are very similar. They believe it is extraordinarily real, and it is transformative in many distinct ways that have been demonstrated in varying studies. Psychologist Kenneth Ring looked at individuals who had UFO experiences versus an NDE group, and he noted the unique behavioral transformative outcomes associated with each group, and our results are supporting his. The point is, there is not enough researchers that study these types of phenomena, and that is why I stay up at night scratching my head. I feel that this phenomena in varying ways is so dramatic and can very well reveal to us an aspect of reality of what life is about possibly another dimension that coexists in our space and time, but at a different frequency that can only be experienced once we leave the body, possibly.
I know you have to wonder if the Pentagon is actually the place where this should be studied. I mean, they're looking, according to the New York Times, at the way these craft move and the mechanics of it, but they must be thinking more deeply about it too. Whether they're going to understand the philosophy behind UFOs and NDEs and see the parallels is another question, though. Whether the Pentagon is equipped to handle that kind of worldview.
Yeah, we could only speculate what they know and how they know it, but very few individuals are unfortunately studying this phenomenon using scientific methodology, which actually doesn't apply, since we don't have the scientific concepts that are needed to study this type of phenomenon. When people report being out of their body, how do you quantify or qualify it, other than analyzing the anecdotal information and noting similarities and differences among other people who experience not only NDEs but other aspects of so-called contact modalities. But the key here is that theories in quantum physics, believe it or not, are consistent with many of the types of subjective experiences that people are reporting. This aspect of existing in another dimension without a body, the perception of time, in other words, as if the past, present, and future exist simultaneously and instantaneously, and that they have this so-called instantaneous information exchange in a timeless and spaceless dimension. Now, what is that all about? They say time and space doesn't exist. Now in eternity exists simultaneously. I see everything at once through any obstacle and a holographic view. What are they talking about? Right. Well, what's interesting is that theories in quantum physics, again, gets at that. And we don't have sufficient time to discuss it in detail some of the theories and aspects of it in order to draw the analogies, but there are analogies that can be made between many theories, according to the quantum hologram theory of consciousness, the synchronized universe model, the holonomic brain theory. Many of these theories are consistent in saying that consciousness can very well be a distinctly different form of energy than the brain. In fact, quantum processes exist in the brain, generate biophotons that radiate in the form of a torsion wave generated outside the body. Now, if that is proven valid, now we do know quantum processes do exist in the brain, but if that is proven valid, then we have the possibility that consciousness can indeed be a distinct entity apart from the brain and exist or continue after bodily death. I mean, we're getting at the heart of the matter here in terms of whether or not the big picture or the big question is not only do UFOs exist, they do, is there life after death? And we can only speculate, other than for those who may have experienced an NDE are convinced, or it's faith-based, whatever the path one took to get there. I think it's beautiful. I wish I had that sense as well. But my research points in this direction, and I'm in the process of writing another book that's going to look more specifically at bridging the gap between science and the subjective experience, and more specifically theories in quantum physics that try to explain what people are reporting subjectively when they do have these unique spiritual, mystical, extraordinary experiences that defy logical explanation.
One of the things about the NDE is that since we have developed means of resuscitating people, we're now seeing something like 770 NDEs every day in this country. So the evidence, although it's you can't duplicate it the way science likes to be able to reduplicate, the exact results of any experiment. The anecdotal evidence is so overwhelming that science is now, I think, just beginning to catch up. I mean, they've spent all this time studying the brain and the shutting down of the optic nerve and trying to explain these things by the mechanics of the brain. And now, as you're saying, through things like the quantum hologram theory, science is taking a leap that makes it possible for them to begin to understand what we've been heretofore calling mystical experience.
Oh, you're exactly right, Lee. And unfortunately, we don't have enough scientists, again, studying this unique phenomenon. And that's why the NDE research evidence is somewhat controversial, although much research has been done, but not as far as I'm concerned, in the right way. Although I commend highly those individuals like Moody, Long, among many others Grayson, who have studied this phenomenon. I applaud their efforts. It's remarkable. And we have learned a great deal about their experience through this. But the bigger picture is, how do you explain it? Is it indeed representative of a possible altered dimension that exists beyond the physical 3D reality? Is it evidence of life after death, obviously? And how does it possibly tie in with other experiences that people have where similar outcomes and associated perceptions and viewpoints are modified as a result of that experience? That's the broad picture. How do we bridge the gap, that wide gap between science, spirituality, reality, whatever you want to call it? And during an NDE, as you indicate, what is it, about 200,000 individuals annually in the United States alone have an NDE.
Yeah.
But the only thing I could say with certainty for I think 150,000 people that die worldwide daily is that your body is going to be buried in the ground. Beyond that, I don't know for sure. And as a scientist, that kind of limits me or forces me to maintain an objective viewpoint. And I can't say irrefutably that the NDE represents an aspect of consciousness that exists apart from the body. I think it might, but here again, as a so-called scientist, I need the evidence. I need the data. Anecdotal information is wonderful. That is exciting and highly informative.
I will give you a clue as to where you should be looking, because as a hospital chaplain for the past 15 years, I have seen so many cases of out-of-body and near-death experience reports. And you mentioned in your book there were 70 cases of this Lazarus phenomenon where people recover way after, science says their body has died and that's it. I alone, as a chaplain, saw 2 of them in my 15 years. One, the doctor declared the patient dead an hour before. The family asked me to come down and pray. We prayed, and half an hour later, the patient sat up in bed, said he was ready to go home, and did, and was perfectly healed. So, I think there are many, many cases that if you talk to hospice workers, nurses, and chaplains, you'll find a wealth of cases that you can study.
Oh, indeed. It's a darn good thing that person wasn't buried when he or she woke up.
Well, sometimes they zip the cover up, and cover so you'd think maybe there'd be more if they weren't suffocating in there.
Yeah, that's quite a surprise. Yes, indeed. There has been sufficient research, and more needs to be done with physicians who work with the critically ill and hospice workers who report that individuals who are going through this life-death transition, they report that it is highly common for them to experience seeing deceased relatives, angels with different colored wings, saying, "I'll be right. Wait for me. I'll be going with their arms stretched out." This is much, much more common than not. The obvious materialistic take on that is it's representative, in other words, of a dying chaotic hallucinatory brain event. Maybe, but here again, why do these individuals report seeing deceased relatives and friends, and in some cases they see deceased people who they didn't know were deceased? But then say, after seeing that person, they mentioned that, hey, I saw this person. I didn't know he was dead. And in fact, the person was dead. There's nuances like that, or reporting saying a number that is can only be observed from the ceiling. Well, there are some researchers that claim that has indeed occurred. In other words, a vertical perception during an NDE, which is I think a key goal for NDE researchers. Can we actually find in their NDE-based reports, can we actually note that they are indeed reporting accurate information beyond the constraints of their body, let alone, that they flatlined and are experiencing something, but can they recall accurate information? Like seeing a number well above their bed or events remote from their room. Some studies contend that while rare in occurrence, it does happen. Question.
Oh, yes. And even planted numbers may not be what they notice, but there's so much evidence of veridical experience that the out of body person has that they couldn't possibly have known lying there on the table. There's also the bigger picture. There were 2 quotes in your book that I love. One was Roger Ebert's looking at the world and saying this is a hoax as he was approaching death. He understood that the whole nature of matrix reality in this world as opposed to the next. And Eben Alexander's quote, "The foundation of all existence is the nature of consciousness." And that's, I think, where the real exploration is going to be taking place in the next few years as science tackles consciousness.
Well, that is a good point. We don't even know where consciousness is, let alone what criteria defines consciousness. That's been a subject of controversy and study for centuries. Aware of being aware, my subjective sense of me, free will, abstract thought, intuition.
Right.
These aspects of function, mental, cognitive function,
right.
We don't know where it exists in the brain. We can only theorize, and there are many theories.
And not only in the brain, because the Buddhists have been saying forever that consciousness is resident in all of matter and all creation. Consciousness is there in one form or another.
Well, what's uniquely interesting about that point is that many quantum physicists, leading physicists, and even Nobel Prize winners like Eugene Wigner, Edwin Schrodinger, they contend that there is a cosmic consciousness. They truly believe, as well as many scientists like Nikola Tesla, among others, that our consciousness is integrated with a consciousness that exists outside the body, whatever that means. There is indeed, at the subatomic scale, possibly a form of consciousness that exists in all matter and certainly all life forms in varying ways. And many physicists are coming to that realization and making theories that are associated with just what you said. Consciousness exists in all things and are interrelated. We can interact with others. And that we need more time to go down this road because there's a great deal more that we can discuss associated with this. And I'm sorry we have to end in a few minutes, but
I know, because there's another chapter in your book that I wish we had more time to talk about, and that's the chapter on reincarnation, because there's a lot of evidence that that's taking place as well.
And Ian Stevenson, psychiatrist from the University of Virginia, did extensive research with young children before the age of about 8 who claim with great accuracy events, people that existed prior to their life, and their family members contend that there's no way that they could have recounted this accurate information. It's the same. It's true with mediums. Some mediums can do that as well. Again, alternate hypothesis, as opposed to whether or not this individual indeed lived at another time in another place and is recounting those memories in another body at this time, is that the individual can be accurately recalling this information using ESP of the information that may exist in a family member. Whatever the source of it is, ESP or I lived before, it's extraordinarily intriguing. And as far as I'm concerned, one thing I can say with great certainty is that ESP is real. It has been demonstrated in many different ways at Stanford, Princeton, Max Planck Institute. ESP is real. NDEs, UFOs certainly are real, at least in the mind of the individual who experiences. The overarching issue is how do we connect the dots between theories in physics, among others, function of the brain, neurological components of the brain, and anecdotal evidence that we are seeing in remarkably similar accounts by individuals who experience so-called the other dimension, another reality, the other side, a non-brain-based physiological event that can only be measured anecdotally, but it's real in their minds. And I'm trying to close that bridge, try to connect the dots and make more sense out of extraordinary, perplexing phenomena that I think may very well represent the key to what consciousness is and what life and reality are all about.
Right. Well, Bob, it seems like we're out of time for today. Perhaps you'll like to tell our audience how they can get your books, both the UFO phenomenon and Life After Death.
Yeah, my book, Life After Death, an analysis of the evidence, was recently published by Schiffer Publishing, and it is available on Amazon. My website is the ufophenomenon.com, and more information about the research I'm doing along the lines we discussed and beyond can be found on my website. And my other book, The UFO Phenomenon, Should I Believe, is also available on Amazon. So, Lee, I want to thank you very much for the time you gave to interview me and to invite me to appear on your show. I'm a big fan of you and your work.
Well, thank you, and
thanks again.
I want to thank you for being here, and I look forward to the book you're working on right now, and you'll come back and I hope and talk to us when that's published. I want to thank Dr. Robert Davis for sharing his research with us today. If you'd like to listen again to this or any of our past shows, just go to our website at nderadio.org. And for more information about the work of IANDS, check out that website, IANDS.org. And tune in next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.